guys talking about an old guy who likes older things. We're talking about Indiana Jones. We're talking about the Dial of Destiny and everything Indiana Jones, the entire filmography, or I guess franchise here. I guess, Colin, maybe not the most timely discussion of these movies, but like we are. Would you rather talk about the Meg 2 or Gran Turismo or Haunted Mansion? Which movie would you rather talk about?
Listen, I know this franchise. I've raced it 1,000 times in the game.
Sometimes I've seen that trailer so many times in theaters, and I'm like, I just need that movie to go away. I'm sure it's like the most average thing ever, but I just don't. I need it to stop. There's like one Sony movie every year that plays their trailer 50 billion times, and that's the one. So I hate it.
It's this year's movie, and the collective groan that came out when they announced it was getting pushed back a week, just earth shattering.
So you could see it 50 more times in theaters. The trailer. Yeah, so we are kind of in the doldrums, and it's also been an interesting year. I think for like an interesting summer blockbuster season where we've seen a lot of successes. I mean, our last podcast we talked about Barbenheimer, and Barbie just crossed $1 billion. Oppenheimer's doing great too. I think I saw it's the highest grossing movie set during World War II ever made, which is that's certainly something. So there's been a lot of successes, and there's also just been a lot of, I wouldn't call them flops, but kind of going on, like, well, I wouldn't say this movie is done horribly, but Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning has probably underperformed, I would say. I think it's made over $500 million, but I think Paramount was expecting more. And you have a movie like Dial of Destiny, which apparently cost everything in the world to make. This movie cost, I think, way over $300 million to make. And it's doing okay at the box office, I guess. Like, it's certainly not lighting the world on fire in its own right. But I'll put it to you there first, too. What are your kind of just, like, what are your thoughts about kind of like the state of the blockbuster and kind of where Dial of Destiny sits in it?
It's like I'm excited and also depressed at the same time to watch. Like, I don't want to spoil too many things, but some of the movies that I had on my most anticipated for the year have just floundered. But at the same time, like, who could have guessed a year ago that Barbie would be, I mean, unless something crazy happens, the biggest movie this year?
Yeah.
Like, who would have pictured it getting $1 billion in under a month? Like, that's just insane.
Yeah.
um, it's yeah. So I'm excited to see, and I still hate to call it an original movie because it's based on Barbie, but to see like an original franchise kind of enter in and just be this massive thing, and especially with Oppenheimer, which is not like your typical um action like IMAX kind of movie. Just to see those succeed is really cool, even if things that I love, like Mission Impossible and Indiana Jones, are struggling a little bit. Well, Mission Impossible struggling a little bit. Indiana Jones struggled a lot of bit.
Yeah, I just looked it up. It's Indiana Jones has made 370 million worldwide, so that's probably not breaking even for quite a while for the old mouse. But you've had other movies too, like the Transformers movie. I still want someone to explain to me why they're just like apes now. That's still confusing to me. But that
This
movie
big
kind of,
monkey.
yeah, Big Monkey, right? That
Godzilla
movie.
versus Kong restarted the box office after COVID. So it only makes sense.
So that movie kind of underperformed. You had Elemental, which actually did better than people like. It's really hung on at the box office, but I think for Pixar, that's still like a little bit of an underperformance there. And then even before the summer, you had Ant Man, just being horrible, and also not making a lot of money. Oh, you had the Flash too. I forgot about the Flash. But you just have like a lot of these, I guess, like sequels or legacy sequels, or like Fast X too, or just like franchises that maybe have gone on maybe a little too long for people's liking, and they're not underperforming. And it's interesting to see Dial of Destiny kind of fall into that, because it's, for a long time we never really expected there to be an Indiana Jones 5 to begin with, and now it's here. And So it's just kind of interesting to see when in the landscape of all this how it falls. You know, there's a case to be made that there's a lot of mirroring between it being a movie about an old guy versus the people who are in power, who makes these decisions around the world. You know, I'm not going to make that decision or make that case, but maybe I just did. But yeah, so we wanted to talk about this because I think we both really love Indiana Jones. We love the franchise, even for all of its kind of moves back and forths between maybe mid and also some of the best movies ever made. So I'll point it to you. I know you are probably out of the two of us, you love Indiana Jones definitely more. So why don't you kind of talk about why you love the franchise so much?
Yeah, so Star Wars is something that's been there like my entire life. Some of my earliest memories are like watching Star Wars, but Indiana Jones wasn't that way for me. And I'm pretty sure the first interaction I ever had with Indiana Jones was when he showed up as a playable character in Lego Star Wars: The Complete Saga, as like a lead up to Crystal Skull coming out.
You're
But I
really
remember
showing
like
your age there.
I remember like asking my dad about it, like, who's Indiana Jones? Like, what's this? Why does he look like Han Solo? And like renting all of those movies from the library when I was a kid. And then I remember for the longest time, I only owned the first two. And so like The Last Crusade and Crystal Skull were kind of like a treat because I didn't own those, so I couldn't watch those all the time. But I just, as I got older, I still love Star Wars, but I no longer hold it on the pedestal that I did because Indiana Jones has kind of taken its place. I showed you before we got on, I have a wall of Indiana Jones, like props, all the different artifacts from the first four movies that I have, right? There's only one franchise that I have pinned to my wall like that. And it's great, like B movie slocky action. It's really heartfelt in certain movies, not all of them, as I'm sure we'll talk about a little bit further on. But yeah, this has always been kind of my favorite escape franchise. The Last Crusade was my most watched movie during the pandemic. I've gotten to see all of these except for Crystal Skull re-released on the big screen, which is kind of cool. But it's one of those things where like every time Raiders comes back, which has been three times in the past 3 years, I've gone to go see it because I love me some Indy.
Yeah, I think for me, we can't go too far in this conversation without talking about the sound effects. Like I just always think of the punch sound effect first because it is so like out of context. It is so hilarious, like how over the top it is, and it's just so fun, and it really just adds to like the rollicking spirit of these movies. Obviously, they're very much there's a lot of influence from like 1930s serials that George Lucas and Spielberg loved growing up, and it just really captures that really fun sense. And there's all the Lucasfilm sound effects you will hear, and in some of the movies you'll hear a lightsaber noise for like when like something like electrical is happening or like a TIE fighter sound. It's really fun, and it kind of adds like a little special little nuance to how like wonderful and singular these movies are for me. I forget when I first watched it, but I think I came to Raiders first and totally just blew my mind. I think I was like a teenager when I watched it. It probably isn't, but spiritually I would probably call it like the first modern action movie in a lot of ways. Like I think it's really informed how a lot of like just general like action movies are tried to made now. Like I think there's a lot of like I think about a movie like Dungeons and Dragons that came out this year. Like that, I think that movie is aping a lot of like its like swashbuckling charm from the Indiana Jones and franchise, and especially Raiders. But yeah, it's just so much fun. Like some of the movies are very campy, and I think Raiders doesn't get enough credit for how campy it is at sometimes. But it's Spielberg just like shooting the shit out of amazing action sequences, and then you have Harrison Ford just being like, I don't know, Harrison Ford, and it's just amazing. And I think the other thing too is I like to talk about Harrison Ford a little bit because he's my favorite. I love that man. He is, he's like obviously he's a one of one. He's Harrison Ford, but he's just like I love him as an action star because he just feels like a real guy, where you have like The Rock and like all these other like Marvel heroes now who are probably like steroided up, doing whatever. He just looks like a normal dude who's like definitely works out, but like isn't taking any supplements, or he's just like a lot of his athleticism and strength probably comes from just like being out in the world and experiencing things. You know, he has like that kind of like old like I think of like a Marlon Brando in On the Waterfront body, where it's kind of like he's strong, but it's kind of just from like doing things with his hands, you know,
Yeah.
and that like kind of like that gruff exterior. Like he kind of looks like an everyman, but obviously he's not, which I just think is just it's such a good combination. So why don't you talk a little bit about Harrison Ford and what you love about him as well?
Yeah, Harrison Ford. So my dad's super into '90s action movies. So in my house, we were either watching Harrison Ford movies or Arnold Schwarzenegger movies. And I always gravitated a little bit more towards Harrison Ford because, kind of like you said, like he feels like a normal guy. Even when he's playing Indiana Jones, or even when he's playing like super spy Jack Ryan, or President Marshall in Air Force one of my favorite Harrison Ford gems. Like he's just a normal guy, which is really nice. But like he has such a kind of stick it to him leading man personality. Like Harrison Ford is never going to act like he's never going to become another character played by Harrison Ford. He's going to become Harrison Ford played by this other character.
Yep.
If that makes any sense, like he's always going to be himself in that sense. And I think it's just really endearing, that kind of carefree attitude, but he's also really sentimental, like in some of these movies, but in all of his performances. Um, it's really easy to forget that he's actually really good at comedy. And there's another actor that I'll talk about a little bit later on that I think they bounce off of each other really well in that regard. And he just brings a lot of heartwarming moments to Indiana Jones, which I don't think we get to see him do as Han Solo. And man, he's a good actor. I'm glad carpentry didn't work out for him.
Yeah, it's funny. I totally forgot he was supposed to be a carpenter when I made the he just does stuff with his hands comment. It just the shoe fits, I guess. He's just like I think obviously like so much of this franchise is just like very singular, talented people coming together to make something really cool. Like Harrison Ford, obviously like a one of one. Like I just like I love that guy like you. He's just amazing in everything. Even like the last like 20 years of his career, where he's just kind of like showing up in random movies like Age of Adeline, or like
Gifted hands.
yeah, or like he comes back to do another Blade Runner movie or Han Solo or whatever. It's like I just like he's just got that magic still. He's still amazing. Haven't seen that Shrinking show that he's in on Apple TV Plus, but he's probably great in it. But yeah, I just he's just it's a weird thing. He's crotchety, but he's also very warm and loving. It just really it's kind of like he really does have like a quality that you never can quite grasp, but he always like, and I think that makes him really affecting when he turns on like different strands of his personality, when he gets like really like emotional, or he gets like the opposite of that, he gets like really like gruff and strong. I think it just works because it's like slightly like not what you expect. I don't even know if that makes sense, but I just really love the guy. But yeah, then you have Spielberg and Lucas obviously coming together for these movies. Steven Spielberg, he's a good director. he's a, he's
Hot
made a
take.
he's made a few he's made a few movies you might have heard of. And yeah, he's made I guess 4 of these. And they're different. They're definitely differences in quality, but it's just I think that's obviously it's Spielberg magic, like the stuff that work. That's why these movies work too. But yeah, I think. Did you have any other kind of like overarching ideas about this franchise you wanted to share before we kind of get to the ranking of them?
Yeah, I think it's really cool because I think a lot of these movies are just so many incredible like people, and I'll get a little bit more into specifics as we get into each movie, but just so many incredible people coming together and really collaborating.
Mm-hmm.
Like some of the best set pieces in this are just they were like, well, this cliff looks cool. And then they put something together because you had so much talent all sitting here in one room. Um, you really created something special. And I really like how these movies all pay tribute to the things they're all nostalgic for a certain type of movie and a certain feeling that Spielberg and Lucas had growing up, but they're not like what we get from nostalgia now, right? It's not,
Yeah,
let's
it's a
bring all
great point.
these let's bring Humphrey Bogart's character from Treasure of the Sierra Madre back. It's let's make a love letter to this thing that feels like something you might have seen then, but it's, well, at the time modern and new, and let's see what of their own personalities and their own life they can really breathe into it. So they really feel timeless to me in a lot of ways because of that, because they're, Raiders is 41 years old now, 42 years old. But it's because it was already mimicking this older style and this older time frame when it came out. It doesn't feel like it's aged hardly at all most of the time.
Yeah, that's a great point because you have so many movies that are even modern movies that are just nostalgic for Indiana Jones, and they just feel like they just feel like pastiche. They just feel like, oh yeah, they're doing an Indiana Jones riff. Like I think that's like it's another thing where it's like I mentioned before how it's it kind of informs every action movie, but there's just like there's a whole genre of movies now that are just like let's just try to make an Indiana Jones movie where they have to go to a fun exotic location and find a fun MacGuffin and solve a few puzzles. And that's just like a huge genre of like adventure movies that Hollywood continues to try to make. Like you watch the Tomb Raider movie that came out a few years ago. It's like, oh, they just made that an Indiana Jones movie kind of thing. Even like the Lost City with Channing Tatum and Sandra Bullock. There's a little Romancing in the Stone in there too, but it's basically just like an Indiana Jones movie.
Who can forget
So
Jungle Cruise?
I could forget it. I really could. Yeah, it's just you're so right about it. How they're like it's nostalgic in the right ways, where it's like we're presenting you what we like, but we're also not slavishly like trying to like recreate it. So I think it's a really good call. Um, shall we get to rankings? Shall we do it?
Let's do it.
So we are gonna try and see how we do in here. We're gonna try to rank. We're gonna combine ranked the Indiana Jones movies from 5 to 1. So I guess the way this will work is each of us will kind of take turns presenting a movie to be placed in the next spot on the list, and then we're just gonna hash it out and see if that works. And maybe my favorite Indiana Jones movie is the Crystal Skull. Maybe we'll fight it out. We'll see what happens, but we're just going to take turns going back and forth and seeing how this works. So, Colin, for you, I will let you present a movie that should be in the number 5 slot. So, what do you think is the worst Indiana Jones movie?
I'm gonna go ahead and nominate The Mummy Returns for the number 5 spot. No, but seriously, I kind of waffled on this a little bit, but at the same time, I didn't at all. And I'm going to put our current Indiana Jones movie, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I'm going to nominate that for number 5.
That is interesting. So I had that slightly higher, but I think that's fine because I had so for me, personal rankings, it's my 4. So I think that fits. If that's your 5, let's do
I
it.
have a feeling my 4 is your 5 then.
Yeah, we'll get there. So we'll put in Dial of Destiny at number 5 for now, which is interesting because I think when you look at this franchise, you have a few bangers in there. I I'll see how you feel. We'll get into Dial of Destiny since this is your least favorite, but I wouldn't say there's any horrible movies here. Would you say?
I would agree.
At least watchable. Um, but yeah, so it'll be interesting to kind of see what we do with like the middle of the range here. But yeah, Dial of Destiny is it's pretty interesting. I would say this. It's not maybe less interesting in practice because like the farther I get away from it, the least the less I think of it. Um, but in terms of like it just being made at all and like the resources that went into it, Harrison Ford just being in an action movie again at 80 years old is just like that guy, like just he's amazing. What can I say? But yeah, this is the only movie not directed by Spielberg. We had James Mangold, who I generally like as a director. You know, he made the best dad movie of the last couple years, Ford v Ferrari.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
so I'll take it to you first, since you wanted to place it at number five. What are your general thoughts about Dial of Destiny?
So I'm gonna echo your first sentiment a little bit that I don't think this movie is terrible. I don't think it's bad. I think it's just okay.
Yeah,
And for me, Indiana Jones is the gold standard. So when it comes, for its final outing with a bronze, I'm, just a little let down. And I think what really separated this from my number four pick, which is probably obvious, but I won't reveal yet, is that in that movie, I think there are some genuinely really great moments scattered throughout that one. Whereas in this movie, I don't think there's anything terrible, but I also don't think there's anything great. I think this movie is just fine from start to finish, but it doesn't really leave me with anything that I'm really like, oh, I can't wait to see this part again, or this really got to me, or anything like that. It's a movie that exists, and I wish it felt like something a little bit more to me.
yeah, and I think a lot of that comes from with James Mangold directing this movie. This does feel like the first time where the well, maybe Crystal Skull a little bit too, but this feels like the first time where it's like this movie is very much playing on the nostalgia of the franchise itself, where it's definitely eating its tail a little bit. Um, and this movie is 2.5 hours long. The thing about all of these movies are they're like right around 2 hours. They just really move, and I think that's like it's really key for these rollicking adventure movies just to have that really good pacing. And there's definitely a half hour of this movie you could cut out. Like I think every action sequence like it could probably get like chopped down a little bit. Like they just keep going and going. Like the opening sequence with AI Harrison Ford on the Nazi train, getting trying to get the dial. That that entire sequence feels like it's 5 hours long. It just keeps going. You keep expecting it to end. There's like a few different points where they could have just like cut it and it would have ended, or they could have ripped out a couple pieces of it. And it just keeps going. And I think there's a few moments in this movie where it just keeps going, and they could have used They could have used an editor. I don't know how you feel about that, but that just like it really just felt like it zapped a lot of the energy from it. Where it's technically well crafted, and there's some fun moments in it, and we'll get to the ending because I have thoughts about the ending later on. But yeah, it just feels like somebody could have come in here and just like stitched together a 2 hour cut, and it would have been way more entertaining.
Yeah, and I think what really like this one feels like a modern movie, and kind of like you said, it feels like it's nostalgic for itself. And I think Dial of Destiny really misses the connection between the genre of the movie and the time period. It's like you talked about earlier, the first three were all based off of these 1930s adventure serials. When they got to Crystal Skull, it was based off of like 1950s sci-fi flicks. And this one doesn't really feel like it's rooted into the movies that were popular at that time period, if that makes
Yep.
sense. Like
Yep.
I feel
Definitely.
like this, Spielberg always wanted to make a James Bond movie. I feel like this should have been the one to be playing off of, like, because that's the James Bond era that Indy's kind of living in. And it just doesn't really feel as authentic to the style of movies and just like the style of production of the time. Whereas all of the other four do, even if it's a little more comical in a certain one than it is the other three.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. And just AI Harrison Ford is weird. Like
Yeah.
it's just really weird. Like we're still I'm kind of against de-aging actors in general, but we're still in the uncanny valley stage, and he's doing his own voice still, so it's weird where he looks young, but it's the 80-year-old Harrison Ford voice. It's just and he's still moving like 80-year-old Harrison Ford. It's very weird, and we're bringing the Nazis back for a third time. You can do it twice. I'm good with twice, and the second time it works beautifully. But three times is we're pushing it a little bit. I do have appreciation for. Well, we'll get to those other two movies that don't have the Nazis in them. They tried something there, They tried to think of other villains. Not maybe not successful in some cases, but they at least tried something different. But yeah, if we're playing the hits quite a bit here, where you just have the Nazis coming back. Mads Mikkelsen is who I adore and is like one of my favorite actors. But this is kind of bad guy karaoke for him. This is probably what the eighth big American movie where he's played the Le Chiffre esque villain. So he is he's kind of running it back with him. Harrison Ford's kind of running it back. I guess I did like Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I thought she was pretty fun. I really admire that her character never is fully redeemed. She's kind of a scumbag the whole time, and she kind of just wants money the entire time. And I feel like, and she definitely did some rewrites because she's big on the writing side of her projects. But I would imagine under different hands, the studio note would have been like, "Hey, can we make her a little more likable?" But I really enjoyed that she's just kind of a scoundrel, and I just really appreciated that. It was just a fun energy. I don't know how you felt about her.
I enjoyed her character. I did not enjoy the kid she brought along. I'll say
yeah,
that.
what's his name? I don't even. Is it Teddy? Is that it?
I didn't even bother to look it up. I just wrote that kid in my notes. And it's very clear. So what I like about her is she feels like a much more interesting version of Mac from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, where she is pretty ambiguous through most of the movie, and you're never 100% sure what side she's on. And she does feel really new in that regard. But then you get to that kid, and you're like, okay, they're just trying to make another short round. When he straight up murders a guy underwater with the handcuffs. But yeah, he just Phoebe Waller-Bridge brings the charm. The character of that kid does not, and it's very clear that that's one of the points where they're really pining for that nostalgia of Indiana Jones and people love Temple of Doom, which I think it's kind of funny that Temple of Doom gets mentioned more than any of the other movies. There's references to that layered throughout, and then they just kind of leave the other ones alone. But they're like, people love Temple of Doom now, so we should put this kid in because they had a kid in.
Yeah, definitely. I wonder if he Jon Favreau loves the Star Wars Holiday Special, so he put a lot of references to that in The Mandalorian. So I wonder if James Mangold's actually, Temple of Doom is the best Indiana Jones movie. He's throwing all these little references in it. I looked it up. His name was Teddy. I'm really proud of myself for getting that right. I pulled that somewhere out of my head. I think kind of the thing we're getting at, it's kind of tough to... It's just kind of tough to... It's one of those movies that's kind of tough to talk about because it's technically proficient, but never really unbelievably exciting or full of personality. It's just kind of... It's empty in a lot of ways. Even... I love my guy Boyd Holbrook, and he's just he's playing just a racist who wants to help out.
He's playing the guy from
Mikkelsen.
Logan, but without a robot hand.
Yeah, exactly. And he's just there. Normally, I'm like, hell yes, Boyd Holbrook, let's go, baby. And then he's just kind of there, and it's okay. I wish there was more out of this character, but he's mostly just the muscle, or the secondary muscle, because rip to that guy who got drowned by Short Round. Short Round 2.
Shorter round.
Yeah, shorter round. Maybe taller. He looked a little taller. Taller round. Yeah, and then Antonio Banderas shows up just playing an absolute dirty boat guy. And that was kind of fun. It just feels like this movie is just kind of lacking a little personality from my perspective.
Yeah, and I think kind of one of my biggest hangups with the movie is the way they handle Indy, Mutt, and Marion as a unit. Because not to get into spoilers, but they kill Mutt off screen, and then like there's a lot of implied tension between Indy and Marion, but she's not in the movie. She's a glorified cameo who shows
Hmm.
up at the end to recreate a scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark. And so I feel like while I don't necessarily like that sad vibe for the movie, and I kind of liked Mutt Williams, not gonna lie. Um,
We'll get there. Me
but
too.
well, like part of it is just me personally. I didn't like that. That's the way they took the character, but they also don't really give it justice for as like severe of an emotional trauma as that is for these characters. And I wish we could have seen Marion be more be more of a character like she was in Raiders and like she was in Crystal Skull, and actually have a little bit more agency than just showing up for the finale.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, part of that's just because Shia is a tough guy
Yeah,
at this point, at this moment in time. So that they were like, we're not touching this kind of thing. Um, yeah, I'm kind of with you there. I guess we should say that we are going to spoil all these movies. So if you don't want these movies spoiled, don't listen. Listen to this podcast, but maybe mute it so we get the numbers, but then come back and listen to it again when you don't want it to be spoiled. I think is the way to go. But we have to talk about the ending of this movie because this was the one time where I was like, oh, what's going on here? Which is when they are flying through, what is that, like a void in the sky with the dial of destiny. I guess they're dialing the dial. I don't know what's going
yeah.
on there.
I
And
didn't.
they
I couldn't tell if it was just like a portal that just happened to be open, or if it was something that was was the dial guiding them to it, or was it just like making this?
Yeah, or did they finally sync it up, which caused the thing to pop out? I don't know. I don't know what was happening, but I thought that scene was really good for like the tension of it. I was like, I have no like this is the first time in the movie where I was like, I don't know where the hell this movie's going, and it's going on for a really long time. And then you have the thing about what was it? Archimedes didn't know about something time wise. I
He
can't
didn't know
remember.
about continental drift. He should have
That's
watched
right.
the Ice Age movies.
A very important historical text, those Ice Age movies. Um, and so you're like, oh, what's going to happen? And it goes on for just long enough where you think it's going to be a fake out. And then they actually go back in time to Archimedes and, or is it the Battle of Syracuse, right?
Yeah.
And it is incredible schlock. I really enjoyed it. It's really incredible that they actually chose to do that, and it's really, really fun. I don't know if it's good, but it's really fun.
It was a curveball, I'll tell you that.
Definitely a curveball. And then I love how like they just decide to end it with Phoebe Waller-Bridge just punching Harrison Ford in the face. It's like, don't worry about this anymore. It's like wait, then was that not all it was cracked up to be? We could just leave now, and now it's over. We're okay. But that would have probably led to a 3.5 hour long Indiana Jones movie if we were dealing with the repercussions of that. So I don't
Yeah.
can't say I blame them.
One thing I think they missed in the finale was like how little of a meal they made out of all of the Nazis getting their just desserts. Because this franchise is known for how brutally it kills its villains,
Uh huh.
and they all just kind of go out pretty quickly, one by one. And
Yeah,
so
and
I think that
yeah,
was an L.
that wasn't L. Yeah, Spielberg has been very open about how it's the original Raiders is very much a Jewish revenge film, and a lot and the Nazis get their face melted off. Like, come on, these are Nazis. Like they can do. They're one of the few historical groups of people that you can literally do anything to, and everybody will be like, yes, that guy got his head chainsawed off. That was great. Yes, great cinema. It's the one thing we can agree on. You can just do horrible things to them on screen. So yeah, I'm with you. They definitely could have done more there. And you have Mads too. Like, just let Mads cook.
Yeah, I have kind of an unhinged theory about this movie.
Oh, please go.
So it went through three writing teams. Um,
There's a lot of
my
writers on
theory
this.
my theory is that the beginning of this movie was originally supposed to be the end of this movie, in the
Oh.
sense that originally I think they were supposed to go back in time and become that plane that like shoots up the train at the beginning of the film. And it, for me, what makes that make sense is the fact that Mads' character has no recollection of Indy, and he's also been healed from what should have been like a body destroying
Yeah,
collision
that's
with
true.
a big metal pole.
Colin, I think you just blew my mind a little bit. That's an incredible take. I love it. That would have been a better movie too, personally.
Yeah, that's my unhinged theory. I think like in one of the drafts somewhere, whether it was like the first draft and that was where they started, or whether it was like the last draft and they're like, what'd be cool, and they're like, no, we've already got Archimedes cast, we can't go back on this.
Yeah, that's really good. That would have made for a much better movie. And there's a weird, I guess, relationship that these movies that fans have with these movies and how weird they get. Like, because obviously it's about archaeology and history meeting with the supernatural or like whatever science fiction. Um, and it seems to I get confused when there's like backlash to some things that are like they really go for it, and sometimes there isn't backlash to things that these movies go for in terms of like crazy things that happen when they're in the pursuit of the MacGuffin. So um, I'm personally just the Indiana Jones movie. There's bound to be some crazy bizarre nonsense that happens. So if there's gonna be time travel in an Indiana Jones movie, sure, why not? Let's do it.
At least it wasn't a multiverse.
Ooh, you're giving them ideas for Indy 6.
the the only thing that really jumped the shark for me in this movie is, and this might be the hottest take I deliver, is I buy Indy surviving a nuclear blast in a refrigerator more than I buy him surviving the hanging where the bomb shows up in the middle of the floor right beneath him, destroys the
Oh,
building,
I'm
kills
so with
everyone
you.
else.
I'm so with you. Yeah, we'll get to that in a little bit too. Any thoughts? Any more thoughts on Dial of Destiny? I feel like we're good here. It's a
Those are a
pretty
lot of
bright.
thoughts for
Yeah,
this movie.
I talked a lot about how it's a movie that you can't really say much about, and here we are. That's why we're podcasters. We're just making gold out of this. Let's move on to our number 4 slot, which I guess comes to me, and I think in the 4 spot, this could be a swing vote, but I'm going to put Temple of Doom in the number 4 spot. How do you feel about that one?
Interesting. I personally didn't put it there, but for the sake of discussion, I'm kind of interested to see how it goes there,
Okay.
because I
Well,
didn't have it very far from number four, so
was it your 3? You can.
it was.
Okay. Why don't we make it since Dial was my 4 and your 5? Why don't we flip flop this one as well and put this 4? Is that
Okay,
fair? Is that fair?
works for me.
Let's do it. So we'll put Temple of Doom at 4, and which I guess, well, this movie has definitely been reclaimed a little bit, but I think it always has been considered slightly like the ugly duck of the Indiana Jones franchise, because it is by far the most different in tone. You mentioned Spielberg wanted to do a Bond movie, and the beginning of this movie is just Harrison Ford doing a Bond riff because he's in the white tuxedo, talking to shady characters about getting his artifact and whatnot. Um, it's so this movie I think is definitely, I totally get why people like it, because I think it's so, there's a lot of cool stuff in it. Like they have like the bridge scene at the end, which is just like really good. Even though I don't love this movie, I think that is like one of the better Indiana Jones scenes. Like it's very like, that is like when you think of Indiana Jones, like that's one of the scenes you think of, where he has the ripped shirt and he has like the sword on the middle of the bridge, and it's just really cool. Um, I think it's a matter of taste, where this movie is definitely more slapstick and definitely way more mean spirited. Because I think Lucas even mentioned he wrote this movie when he was going through his divorce and he was just kind of angry, so he wrote this movie. The tone just does not work as well for me. I know, like, so they're working with, so we have Kate Capshaw is the indie girl this time around, who I think was Spielberg's second wife. So I guess good for
His
them.
current wife.
Oh, they're still together. Good for them. Proud for them. Well, it led to something good. um, and I don't mind. I think this is where I differ. Where I think a lot of people over time have pointed out her as like the weak link of this movie and find her really annoying. And the way I slightly look at it is she's doing exactly what she's been told to do. She's acting up to 11 and she's being this person where it's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm in nature. I need all my jewels and I need my money." It just, the comedy doesn't work for me. I just don't find it particularly funny. I just I see I they ascribed to the vision of what they were going for, and I just don't like that vision very much. I guess is how I look at it. It's just um, Indy, I think as a character is like slightly more like he teeters back and forth between being snarky and really heartwarming and also like a little cutting. And I think this movie he's a little too mean spirited and I guess manly man swashbuckling for my taste. I think they dialed it back the other way really nicely in the franchise later on. But um, yeah, I just this movie's a little wonky for me, which is why I don't love it, even though there are like a lot of really fun set pieces that we'll talk about. And some of the racism's tough. It's just tough, you know. Short round saying it feels like he stepped on fortune cookies. That's just it's tough. It really is. But yeah, I think that and just a lot of other things. It's just it's just not a movie for me. But why? What are your takes on this movie? Why do you kind of defend it a little more?
So I love all four of the movies we still have left to talk about.
Fair enough.
I'm
Fair enough.
just gonna put that out there. Um, but I think what's interesting in like how this one has been reclaimed over time is I think this is also kind of the odd one out because this
Definitely.
is the least connected to any of the others, right? We don't see any of these characters again. At this point, Marion's in 3 out of 5 of these movies. She's not in this one. We don't see Sala or Brody, who are the other two main connections. Um, so I think this is kind of the odd one out over time. So I can definitely see like why it probably hasn't aged up as well as Raiders or Last Crusade or even Crystal Skull at this point. Um, but I also think that this was the ugly duckling until two uglier ducklings showed up in most people's opinions. And so it also gets like the level of reclamation that the prequels get. Well, this is a much better movie than the prequels, but like the Star Wars, everything they've done since 2019 has shown up, and people are like, "Wow, Attack of the Clones isn't so bad." But I feel like this movie has kind of undergone a little bit of that as well. But I do agree with you. I think this is the most Bond of them all because it is a pretty isolated event. And I think this is more like this is just kind of the most straightforward adventure of them all too. Because the stones themselves aren't really tied up emotionally to any of the characters. They're more indicative of like that journey Indy is going on and like understanding to appreciate like the value they have to other people and not just as relics. Um, but yeah, I think it goes on much more of the exciting action set piece to action set piece kind of adventure thing than some of the other movies do. Especially the latter 3 movies in the franchise are going to be a lot more sentimental than this one is, and this one, kind of like you said, is mean spirited and not really sentimental at all because divorce kind of does that to you. Um,
Just Lucas being down bad writing the script. It's just really funny
but
to think about.
I think it's also the goofiest and the most slapstick. Like this
Oh,
might be the
absolutely.
most comedic of all 5 of them. Like there is
Definitely.
some goofy stuff that happens. Like in the first 10 minutes, some guy gets killed with a flaming kebab.
I forgot about
Um,
that.
I think in taking this back to like movies and entertainment of the 1930s, I think you're gonna have the other two, especially the Last Crusade, is a lot more like tongue in cheek with its humor, and a lot more like Radio and Jack Benny and like that kind of humor of that era. Where this movie is straight up Three Stooges at some points.
Definitely.
There's
Yeah.
when Short Round saves Indy from when he burns him later in the movie to save him from the blood of the Kali. Like Short Round runs in and does like a bunch of really showy like kung fu kicks and just like Short Round is going toe to toe with these grown men who are part of a several 100-year-old cult trained to do nothing but kill.
Short round. He's just got it.
I love it for all those reasons because it is so different, but it also sits lower on the list because it is so different.
Yeah, I think it's just I'm typically the one on this podcast that like rails against formula, but I think in the as far as Indiana Jones goes, I think the properly calibrated version of the Indiana Jones character I think shows up in the other movies rather than this one where it's I also get it because you can look at it where like this is a prequel, so there's growth that comes after this movie. um but like when I'm watching this movie, I don't really care. I don't really think about it as a prequel. Like I don't really think about the interconnectedness of these, like the lore, like the interconnected lore of these movies. I just think about like the lore within each specific movie. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
um but so when you just watch this movie, like I don't know, like the stones I think are the lamest of the MacGuffins in my
That's fair.
in my opinion. um a lot of good MacGuffins. I guess at the end we'll talk about our favorite MacGuffin of the bunch. But yeah, it's just I don't know. Like it just a lot of it rubs me the wrong way, and like I don't know. Like the racism, I think is just tough. I'd say it's really tough. It's we talk about it to this day for a reason. But there is that being said, I do like I am totally fine with it being above Dial of Destiny because there's a lot of really fun moments in it. Like I love the coal car race through the tracks of like the caves of like the temple. And it's so funny because when you think about it and you look back at the logic of them, like they kind of don't make sense. It's like why would a track just like go out into like the side of a cliff? Like that makes no sense, but it doesn't matter because it's really fun. And like like the water rushing at them, and it's really goofy in that way, and I really like that. I think the plane sequence is really fun. Honestly, like that is the most probably the least like believable, like they survived that stunt in all of these movies. Like well, like like him surviving a nuke in the fridge. I think him surviving falling from a plane in a raft onto a mountain. There's what can you say? Sometimes I'll just put it this way: sometimes the Indiana Jones movies aren't believable, if you can believe that, and it's okay. But yeah, I think there definitely is a lot of personality to this movie, which I think is makes it interesting at the very least to definitely to talk about. Um, Obviously you have like the whole Kalima, the rip the heart out. Well, that stuff is just cool. I don't like that's just like there's scenes that have lived on throughout throughout I guess pop culture history since that people continue to refer back to that make this movie really cool. Whether it's like the heart scene, the bridge scene, a bunch of different stuff. So there's a lot of really good stuff in it.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason why I had this a little bit ahead of Crystal Skull on my rankings is because I think a lot of the cultural insensitivity allows it to get away with certain goofiness that you because like this movie plays on our own prejudices that you have as an audience towards like this mystical foreign land called India.
Yeah.
And so I think it like in a kind of twisted way it masks some of the goofiness because as an audience in 1984, like you don't know, for all you know, that's what they do in India. It's not really, but
Yeah.
um I think some of those comedic beats work a little bit better because it plays off of the audience's own cultural insensitivity and more the audience's own unfamiliarity with other like foreign lands.
That's fair
Um,
because this movie is way more self-referential and mean-spirited in that way. So that's I could get behind that take maybe.
and
Maybe.
I'll talk about a movie that doesn't have that to help its goofier moments in a little bit. Um, but I do want to say that the opening scene in Club Obi-Wan is one of my favorite like indie things ever. Like I just love
It's really
everything
good.
about that with the little back and forth on the table and like somebody getting shot while the champagne bottle pops and the Indy cutting the Paramount shield to hide from all the bullets
Yeah.
and the cover of Anything Goes is just 10 out of 10.
It's really good. Yeah, the him running with the shield as the machine guns going on. That's really fun. Then you have there's pandemonium. He's trying to get the antidote, and people are just kicking it all over the place. It's just it's I obviously Spielberg, a lot of personality as a filmmaker. Again, he's made good movies, but I love his playfulness in his action sequences. Like just time and time again, he has obviously he's a great master and he knows how to like stage a sequence and they're cool to watch, but also they have just little great personality moments that it just really make them like put them over the top. So it's just the action is really fun in this movie, and definitely that first bit where it's like that is like the Bond Indiana Jones Bond riff, and that's really fun too. Then you have Short Round waiting outside with the car and driving away. You have your Dan Aykroyd cameo in there. There's just a lot going on in that first bit of the movie that's really fun.
Fun fact about the bridge scene is I've actually seen some of the alligators they used in that movie.
Oh, was it just like in Florida?
Yeah.
That is funny because like when they go down to the gators, it's just like clearly stock footage, like they just throwing them chicken or something, and like the gators are doing like the death roll. And they put like red cloth to like match like the robes of the bad guys. It's really funny.
But yeah, so I've seen some of them because they do live in Florida. And then like it was really cool because I talked a little bit earlier about how like improv makes a big impact in these movies. And like the bridge scene itself wasn't something that they were originally going to be able to do. And they lucked out, and on location there was some like actual company was building something or other and had a whole bunch of construction equipment in the area. And they're like, hey, we'll pay if you'll like come build this thing for us, because they couldn't afford to bring all their own equipment and contractors out, but they were able to like piggyback off of this other thing going on. And so they built them one bridge, and they're like, you're going to have one shot at it. And if it doesn't work, like that's it.
Yeah, it's a really good scene. It's really fun. Shall we move on?
Let's do it.
Okay, we'll go to our number 3, which I will let you decide. Number 3.
Number 3 is going to be Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
I'm shocked it's not Raiders. This sounds right. I feel like there are some people who have different takes out there, but these 3 movies in whatever order is correct in my estimation. But yeah, tell me a little bit about Crystal Skull.
So I think I just talked about in Temple of Doom how like the unrecognizability of like a foreign country lets the movie get away with a lot more goofiness. I think because Crystal Skull taps into such a familiar atmosphere, especially in the first hour or so where you're just in the Midwest in the 1950s, I don't think it manages to get away with as much goofiness throughout. And I'm thinking in particular of like the Jocks versus Soch fist fight.
Oh, which I love it. I love it.
I love the subtle details in that scene, like when Shia LaBeouf dips his comb into the guy's coke, and then the girlfriend points it out. But I think it makes some really great action sequences feel a little bit unbelievable. I think the nuke town is the one that everyone kind of goes to, but I think even the chase throughout the university on the motorcycle, I think is really cool, and it's a setting that you don't get really in any of these other movies.
Sequence. Yeah.
But I feel like it feels a little bit more slapstick and more goofy than it is driven as some of the action in the original 3, because it's in such a familiar environment, not just from people's memories, but pop culturally. It feels a little bit more predictable in that regard. Like obviously Mutza and Greaser, of course, they're gonna brawl with the Socs for no reason. But I think, and I talked about this with Dial of Destiny, is I think there are some legitimately really great moments in this movie. I don't think this movie is always firing on all cylinders, particularly in any scene where Mac is present. But I think there are some really great indie moments in this movie. I'm thinking like in particular where Jim Broadbent's character Dean Stanforth because that's his name. Um, they're sitting in Indy's house and they're talking about Brody dying and Henry Sr. dying, and there's the quote, "It seems we've reached the age where life stops giving us things and starts taking them." It's just, man, like that hits. And there's a lot of moments in this movie where stuff like that, whether it's action or comedy or other sentimental parts, like really hit. And when it hits, it hits. But unfortunately, it doesn't always hit.
Yeah, and I think so. This movie's interesting, where it's definitely playing a little bit off of the nostalgia of the franchise, because this movie came out what 15 years after Last
It'd
Crusade.
be 19 years.
19 years, yeah. So it's been a minute, but it's still trying new things, which I really appreciate. Kate Blanchett, God bless her, one of our greats, just hamming it up as Irina Spalko, or however she says her name. Um, it just as this, like, as the Russians, like, it is just, they are like, I think the hamminess, I think, comes from the actors and knowing what movie they are in versus the setting in this situation. So I love, like, as soon as Kate Blanchett shows up and she is doing that hammy Russian accent, I'm like, this is great. They know exactly what they're doing here. And I personally, my favorite sequence is that university chase sequence. I think it's so much fun and such a blast. And I don't hate Shia LaBeouf in this movie. I think he's, like, tough guy, but he is always been a pretty good actor in my estimation. I think he's really fun here. And it's interesting because Spielberg has always been known to kind of like pick people and be like, you are like the one. And it seemed like he was going to be that. And you've kind of seen glimpses of like a movie like Honey Boy, where he's amazing in that, even though that movie is entirely full of shit, apparently, where Shia LaBeouf made that movie all up, because it was supposed to be on his life, but I guess it wasn't at all. So yeah, I think he's a really talented guy, very, very complex person, but I think he makes for a really good. There are so many movies where the young, like the son or the young version of like the character you love comes into the picture and it's really terrible. I don't think this is one of them. I think Shia LaBeouf is perfectly fine. I think the jokes come from his name being Mutt. I think most of all, because I don't know. That's just, like, I guess, silly to point out. But I think this movie's great. Definitely goes a little off the rails a little bit with the aliens at the end, but it is what it is. I think the other big thing, probably the other big demerit I have with this is that this is made right before the Avatar time. Is this '08 and then Avatar was
Yeah.
'09? So I guess they were being made somewhere around the same time. But this is when we are starting to really rely on, like green screen and CGI and like implementing that into how we make movies. And, the CGI just isn't great. And it's very clear that they're on a sound stage a lot of the time in this movie. So that's not ideal. But, I think there's some really fun action sequences in this. I love what are those things? Like those killer ants that they have to deal with in that, like,
Big
that
damn
field.
ants.
Yeah, the big damn ants. Like, those are like, that sequence is great, and it's kind of just like, it's really gross when they all like go into that guy's mouth. Like, I just like it. It's gross. So I just think this movie's really fun. What can I say? I like the Duke fridge. It makes me laugh. I very much enjoy it.
Yeah. And I'm gonna echo that for the most part. I think this movie works really well for me until you get into the jungle. And then that's where a lot of like the goofiness, like to me, the worst moment in this movie is Mutt swinging on the vines with the monkeys.
Oh, I love it.
That's
It's fine. It's okay.
um, but I think like there's some really great moments with Marion, like Indy and Marion in the truck, and when he delivers the "they weren't you" um, line. Like I think that's another example of a time when this movie works really great. Again, I think most of this movie's problems come from a character named Mac, who just he's never. And I feel bad because Ray Winston always gets cast as this character in every franchise.
Love Ray Winston. He's the best.
um,
but
but
he's not
yeah,
here.
Mac never really works for me. And I don't know if Oxley ever fully works for me either.
John Hurt's going
Um,
for it in this movie.
yeah,
He's
John
really
Hurt's
going
going
for
for it.
it.
But I think the core drama with Indy, Mutt, and Marion works really well for me. I think the score in this movie is really good, and I don't love it as much as the other two we have left to talk about. But I think like I think of that final scene where, I mean, the final shot actually, where um, Mutt's about to put on the hat and Indy grabs it from him, and then the music swells and comes in with the Indiana Jones theme. And I think there's a lot of really good things about this movie, and I think it gets unfairly lumped with the Star Wars prequels when this is easily a cut above the Star Wars prequels.
Yeah, there's a lot of imagination in this movie that I really appreciate, and I think it's definitely, if this movie I think was more practical, I think people feel a lot better about this movie, because there are some times where like, yeah, like swinging in the vines with the monkeys. It doesn't. Newsflash, doesn't look like National Geographic. Sorry to say, it doesn't look very real. Um, but I love it's for me. I love how playful and like silly it is, because like, that leads to like they're in that like the tank truck, and they are like slowly like dropping, like they're in like trees, and like they drop from one tree to like the next, and it lands them in the river, and then they have to like go down like the bits of like the river on like the waterfalls. Like it's really like there's so much goofy stuff in this movie that it's like, like swinging through the vines with the monkeys, that's the word, that's the least of our problems. We're dealing with interdimensional aliens. you know so I think it's fine. I like this movie quite a bit, and I think I have a conflicted relationship with the indie girls, but I love Marion. Like, Marion is the best, and I just like, I think Karen Allen's amazing, and she is really fun in this movie. And I think you're right, where it's like there's a lot of really good banter and a lot of good lines in this movie that I think help to even out the wonkiness through it, because I think Karen Allen is just really good at like sparring with Harrison Ford. They're really good together, and I think, like, especially going back to Raiders, like these movies have always like given the Marion character a little more agency than the typical action adventure girl typically gets. So I think I just seeing her, like having her come back for this movie, is just really great.
Yeah, and I think even the wonky bits of this movie, I think, are pretty forgivable when you understand that they'd moved into a different genre that they were kind of nostalgic for, and they're very, very blatant about the fact that no, we wanted to make like a very schlocky 1950s alien attack.
Yeah,
This was an era where people were, filming like zoomed in, shots of ants and grasshoppers and being like, 50 feet, and then posing them onto like army soldiers shooting at them. And so when you think of like the style that they're getting at, I think it's a really good imitation of that style, even if it doesn't taste the same as the first three do.
yeah, I like it a lot, and I think it's tough too, because you know, you watch Raiders, and that movie hasn't really aged a day at all, and it's tough where it's like this movie is 20 year, like, what is it, 27 years younger? Is that math, something like that?
That makes
and
sense.
and it's already showing its age. It's so that's just I mean, it's tough because Raiders is like probably like, as far as practical effects goes, I feel like I'm kind of ruining what I think about these movies for later on in our rankings, but you get the idea. I like that movie. I like that movie a whole lot. I think from there we should move on to one and two, and rather than me designate two, I think we should hash this out, because I know you. So we have Raiders and Last Crusade, and I know you love Last Crusade.
You know it.
So I'm curious. Is Last Crusade your personal number one?
Yeah.
Okay, it is. It is. See, it's tough because it's like, Raiders is kind of like unimpeachable, but I love Last Crusade. It's really good. What do we think? Should we just say fuck it and put Last Crusade one?
I think
Should we
we
do it?
should. It's
Let's
it's
do
where
it.
it deserves.
Fuck it. Fuck it. I would say Raiders is probably my favorite of the two, but content. Why not? So we'll put Raiders at 2. I feel okay with that. We'll survive. Everyone on the internet will survive. And then we'll put Last Crusade at 1. Um, that's fine with me. And there's still time in this podcast. Things could change. Who's to say?
They won't, at least from this side.
They definitely won't. I'm just too lazy to go back. It's already in the doc. It's there. But yeah, let's talk about Raiders at 2. What is there to say about this movie? You know, it's like Jaws. It's great.
I
It's one of
think
the. Sorry, go ahead.
I think more than any other movie in this franchise, this is a pretty movie. Like
Yeah,
visually, I think this movie wipes the floor with everything. And kind of like you mentioned, it hasn't aged today. It really hasn't. And I think Spielberg's been pretty open about the fact that David Lean inspired the visual sense of this movie,
definitely.
particularly Lawrence of Arabia. There's a little bit of Bridge on the River Kwai, but really Lawrence is the visual basis for this movie. And Douglas Slocum, who shot the first 3 movies, is just going insane every time they're in the sand. There's, I saw a tweet list or an article or something that was like the 50 most beautiful shots from Indiana Jones, and probably 30 of them were from this movie. And for good reason. Like this is just a gorgeous movie, and it blows not just other action movies of the era, but modern action movies out of the water, just in terms of how just intricate the shots are laid out. Like Spielberg's a king of blocking, and that's evident here. But you've
Hmm.
just got some amazing shots all throughout this movie.
Yeah, and it's like I know the opening sequence of this movie has been studied and like however many times. You know, it's like basically the opening sequence of this movie with the boulder and everything is taught in film school because it is a perfect little short film about how to properly introduce a character. You have him come out of the shadows, and it's really sweet. And you see all these reactions to Indy before you even see him. Then you have that amazing action sequence, and then kind of flying out, and then I guess one of my favorite things is just like the snake in the plane because it's like why the fuck would there be a snake there ever? It just makes me. It's just really. In other movies that would be lame, but here I'm like, it's just great. It's it's Reggie. It's his pet Reggie. He loves him. But yeah, I just it's just the opening is just it's just great blockbuster movie making, and the rest of it is too. It's just there's I think one of the most amazing things ever is I think the stunt guy's name is Terry Leonard, the guy who goes underneath the truck and goes down the ladder at the bottom at the underneath the truck and kind of that scene, that entire stunt is just like holy shit, like he deserves all of the awards for it because if you watch it now and it's like how the fuck did he do that, like how was he okay after that happened. So you just have amazing stuff like that, and then there's just like how many great there's so many great movie moments from this movie, like literally I think every scene in this movie has probably been parodied or referenced in other movies. So it is kind of one of those like with Star Wars and Jaws and all that where it's so much into the public consciousness that it's just it just is it's just really great.
Yeah, and I think you know there's a complaint that like some of the villains in Indiana Jones can be a little bit forgettable on their own. But I don't think Paul Freeman gets enough credit for how good he is at
Oh yeah.
playing Bullock in this movie.
Yes.
Like he eats up every scene. He's so good. And like he's an asshole. Like he's working with the Nazis,
Yeah.
but you can't help but love him.
He is chewing that
He
scenery so hard. It's great.
he literally eats a fly for this movie. It's he's just so good in every single scene that he's in, and in the parallel between him and Indy throughout the movie, just gives him this edge that I think this franchise mostly has good villains, but it just gives him an edge that none of the other villains are really able to quite level with Indy in that same way. Whereas every scene they're in, Indy's just looking in a mirror, and Paul Freeman destroys it and is going toe to toe with Harrison Ford.
Yeah, and I love Ronald Lacey too as Toad. Is it Toad Tot? I don't know how to say it.
Major
It's Toad.
Tote.
I think it's Toad. Yeah, he's great too. Like it just he's really chewing the scenery too. There is yeah, it's great. And obviously like there's the classic stories of everybody when they were filming just being sick as hell. So they're like, we're not gonna do the sword sequence with this dude. Sorry for practicing for weeks, but Harrison Ford's just gonna shoot you now. And then it turns into like one of the greatest scenes ever. you know, yeah, it's just God, it's just so good. And like I said at the top of this, where it does feel like the first modern action movie. It feels like everybody is trying to live up to this in some way or another. It's just good movie, very very good movie.
It's yeah. Would anything be here without it? I mean, we talked about earlier how many movies are straight ripoffs of the Indiana Jones
Yeah,
template, but like how many major action franchises or I mean major action stars would even been able to create the things they did without Raiders coming in and paving the way.
yeah. It created everything. A movie about getting the thing to stop the other thing. Just villains being very very evil in a swashbuckling way. It's just it's really great. It's one of those I put it on because when we were leading up to Dial of Destiny, I just started watching all of these, going back through all these movies again, like everybody else. And I was sitting next to my wife, and the opening goes on. She was like, and both of us were like, "Damn, this movie just rips! Like it just really works, and every scene is just so cool." So it's just yeah, it's great. It's a quality flick.
It is. I think it's gonna have a pretty good legacy. Not
I
gonna
think so. I
lie.
think so too. I think you're right. Well, let's move on to our number one, which Last Crusade, which is what would you say? Is this one of the better sequels ever?
I think
It's
so.
really up there. It's really good.
And it's like it's not even like it doesn't quite belong in the same category as Empire for me because it's not a direct follow up, but it's like,
Hmm.
8 years after the original, the third movie in the franchise, and it sits in a category with like War for the Planet of the Apes is like let's end this thing with the biggest bang possible.
Yeah. How many? Yeah. How many third movies in a franchise are there that are good? And like this is definitely at the top of that list in a lot of ways. It's just and I think they struck gold with Connery coming into the role. I know
Amen.
you have a long history with Sean Connery. We've talked about a few of those kind of very interesting films in his filmography because you've gone on a journey and watched all of his movies. Um, him as Henry Jones. Henry Jones Sr. is just he is great, and it was I think at some point it was supposed to be another actor or the character itself was supposed to be a little more I guess there was supposed to be a little more of a nerd, and he was like, "Actually, I have notes because I'm Sean Connery. I need to be a little cooler than that." But it's great too because I think like he doesn't overpower it in a way where the character is still very much like he's an intellectual, and then when Harrison Ford is punching people, he's like, "Oh, good heavens!" I mean, he doesn't say that, but that's his reaction in a lot of ways, where he's kind of out of his element. Um, and the dynamic between them is just so much fun. It's just such a blast. It's such a smart idea to bring in his dad for this, and then obviously you have the whole prologue with River Phoenix, which is also just really great. Kind of another one of those like young version of the character things that typically never works, but it just works really really well here, and it acts as another just really good short film at the beginning of this movie. I'll let you. I guess I'll let you run with this because this is one of your movies. Is this on your letterbox for still?
Oh yeah, this is my top
Yeah.
four.
This is one of your movies, so I feel like I should cede the floor to you here.
I'm gonna be a little unhinged, and I'm gonna put my one negative first.
Okay, this is great. Get it out of the way.
So I think that in a way, this movie kind of broke the franchise because this is the first one where Indy has more of like a 3 point arc, from act to act. And I think part of what makes Crystal Skull and Dial of Destiny feel clunky at times is trying to recapture that emotional arc rather than the first two, which are like, here's an adventure, let's go.
Yeah.
But I think because this one set the standard so high, it redirected the franchise later on to try and recapture this movie instead of trying to recapture like Raiders or recapture Temple of Doom a little bit more.
Yeah, it probably always should have ended here, right? And like it is the same idea where it's like we need him to reconnect with his family member in this way and like think about how he actually connects with people. And yeah, you're right. They're just doing it again and again. So, and judging by how long it took for Crystal Skull to be made, I'm sure that was all like they wanted to wrap that up in a nice way because this was going to be the last one. But then they dropped the bag, so they made two
Yeah.
more.
Well, initially there were plans to make a fourth with Connery and Ford both on board, but Lucas
Oh,
and
really? I didn't know
Spielberg
that.
spent the '90s arguing about aliens, and it wasn't until after the Star Wars prequels that Spielberg finally relented.
That's so funny. I never knew that. That's great.
And so that I've read there's a book that details the making of all of these, and it's literally like every time they're tossing around ideas, George Lucas is like aliens, and Spielberg's like, no, I don't want to do that. It just gets pushed and pushed until the fourth one. But yeah, I think I love everything about this movie. This was my favorite when I was a kid. This started my Sean Connery obsession. I played an old man in a play in the sixth grade, and because of this movie, I did a Sean Connery voice for him the whole time. For a brief while, this movie was the reason why The Rock by Michael Bay was my top movie of all
Hell
time
yeah. Let's go.
when
Let's
I
go,
was in middle
brother.
school. Because it opened the gateway to Sean Connery for me. Like you said, I've been through every part of that gateway. um, but I think this movie is interesting in a lot of ways because it lets Connery and Ford be funny, which isn't something they get enough credit or enough opportunity to do. And because they're both leading men, they're both more or less action stars. I think Connery does a little bit more drama than he does action, but they're not the guys you want to see in a screwball comedy. And Spielberg lets them do that and improvise, like the line about um, talking in her sleep. Sean Connery improvised that, and I don't think the pair of them get enough credit for how funny they are. Sean Connery in particular, if you ever get a chance, check out A Fine Madness, which is just an Irving Kershner comedy. It's hilarious. But all of like he's just such a good actor. I can't say it any more concise than that. He's so good, and this movie gets him the opportunity to have that really touching emotional arc, reconnecting with Indy, and to be funny and be that comic relief at times, and to also have little bits of action scattered throughout there. And it's just so good. Everything the two of them do, it makes you wish that even if it wasn't Indiana Jones, that they had just done like I don't know, like Lethal Weapon or something
Yeah.
together. Just put them in more things together.
Yeah,
Um,
the whole scene with them in the burning castle is just so funny. We're like, son, I have to tell you something. The floor's on fire. It's just really. He's like, do you like my Sean Connery accent, by the way?
it's
Is that
pretty
good for
good.
you? That was not bad. I was proud of myself. I didn't know I could do that. I just pulled it out. It's just, and then they're messing with I guess the trap door and the swinging door in the fireplace is so funny. And then you have like the hench lady just yelling alarm at the top of her lungs is so good. It's so so good. You're right. Like they are just so funny together. I'm like it kind of is like one of those things where it really is like a match made in heaven. Like maybe you cast like another person in there, and just this movie just isn't nearly the same. But it's like these guys just have amazing chemistry together, and it just makes something like it creates something that is just so much more special than probably what was in the script.
Yeah, and I think that this movie twists the formula a lot because the Grail is tied so intricately into like the search for his dad.
Yeah,
Um, but it also twists the formula like with the indie girl because you have Elsa who is only an indie girl until Sean Connery shows up at the 48-minute mark. I know that
Mm-hmm.
down to the minute. And she stops being the Indy girl right after that. And there's about an hour and a half of movie left. So it really flips with her and having this love interest for both of them become the villain. And I think Donovan's a lot of fun, even if he's not just the most, you know, well rounded. I don't think he quite has the edge that like Bellic has. But Donovan is he's a fun villain. He's very like guy in the chair evil. Like he kind of feels like, I mean, he's literally in the chair when he makes a big reveal. But I think there's just a lot of sinister elements that are a lot of fun to this movie as well. Um and it's not dark, like Temple of Doom was, even though it's actual Nazis as the villains. But they managed to have, stakes to that and to them finding the Grail, and just the entire the action sequences of this movie are a lot of fun. I love the boat scene, where he says, "Don't go between them," and she goes between them, and is just getting chopped up while they're beating each other
Yeah.
on the back, and just the fact that that tank scene was mostly improvised because they needed more action later in the movie, and there's just so many wonderful things that came together to make this movie so special, and
Yeah.
it's just so good.
There's so many funny moments too. Like I weirdly like where Temple of Doom is probably the most slapstick. I think I laughed the most at Last Crusade. Like it is so funny. Like you have the whole like book burning sequence where Hitler, like they think like Hitler's gonna like take the notebook and throw it into the fire, and he just like signs his name in it, and it's just really fun. It's really funny. Um, yeah, there's just so many like little bits, or like when they let the boats go before they do the motorcycle chase, and they just like fly out, and all the Nazis are mad at that. It's really really funny, and very very playful in a way that I just like really appreciate. My favorite bit is they talk about how Brody has the book, and he's like he knows everything, like he'll disappear in like 2 days and you'll never see him again, and it cuts to it's like, does anybody here speak English? It's just it's such a funny, just a really great cut. I think it's like I think it might be my favorite like cut in the movie. It's really funny comedic timing. So yeah, it's just it really does, like if there's gonna be sequel like or a franchise, like this is kind of what I want it to be. Like there's like genuine heart, it's really funny, and it's also just really fun. The action sequences are really inventive and fun, um, and the Grail's pretty cool too. I don't know how you feel about the Grail, but I think the Grail's pretty cool.
I love the Grail. I think everything about the Grail Temple and that final climax is just great. I really like Spielberg's blocking in that scene where it's you have Donovan like walking back and forth between these two sides who are, kind of like posed up against each other like those old Captain America Civil War posters. um, but you just have so much great movement, and I think the trials in the temple itself are a lot of fun, and you have Connery, Henry Sr. dying in the background and trying to kind of walk him through, really like walking Indy through all these lessons he's had to learn from his father and about his father throughout the movie. And then you get into the Grail room itself, and obviously the aging scene is one of the most iconic things from this franchise, where
Really
he's just
fun.
becoming really old, and it brings Elsa, like, because she picks the wrong Grail, and again it's this tension of like, whose side is she really on? Like, is she a bad person? Like, she's a Nazi, but does she get to redeem herself? Like that kind of stuff. And I think she's really great in all of those sequences towards the end of the film. And when you get to the actual climax itself, and when Sean Connery calls him Indiana for the first time, and the music swells, and it's just, oh, it's so good.
It's good. It really works. And Spielberg, he's kind of a sap. We've seen like he's very sentimental. Um, but that scene just works, man. Like where he's telling him to let go. It's really good. And that's kind of, I guess that's the Spielberg magic sometimes, where just like it's any other filmmaker, like that stuff would be way too sappy, but in the situation it really really works, and it's great. Um, yeah, it's a great movie. I also I like Allison Duty in this movie. I think she's pretty fun. I definitely prefer Marion, but obviously, like, Elsa's a different character. You know, she's working through different stuff here, so it's not quite the Marion stand-in that like Kate Capshaw is, where like she's very much just like she's not a heroine because she's not very heroic, but she's very much like on the heroic journey with Indy. Whereas obviously that she's, you know, Alison Duty, she's got her own things going on. She might like the Nazis, who's to say? Um, but I like her. I think she's actually really fun in this movie. I didn't realize she was Australian. I think the German accent's a little hacky, but I think in a fun way. I just didn't realize she was an Australian until afterwards. I was like, oh, good for her. She did it. um, yeah, is there anything else you wanted to mention here?
Yeah, I've got two small things. One, the cut from the guy, his name is just Fedora. They didn't give him an actual name.
Mm-hmm.
Putting the fedora on Indy and then cutting to the boat scene where he's still chasing after that cross of Coronado. I think is another just really great cut within this movie. And then partially about this movie, partially the franchise as a whole is I think I can confidently say that I think John Williams does his best work in the franchise as a whole. But I think Last Crusade might be my favorite John Williams score out
Oh
of all of
wow,
them. And I've also listened to every John Williams score. So
I believe you. You do love John Williams. That's a good one. I don't know what my favorite John Williams score would be, but this one's pretty good, as all of them are. Can't say there's a bad one, and that I could think of off the top of my head. Yeah, it's just I. This is a very it's a very special movie that I think you're almost kind of surprised that it works as well as it is because it's very much built off of like the action formula that was built in Raiders, and it was iterated on ever since. But it's just really special. It is kind of one of those lightning in a bottle movies where it somehow just it really is kind of like the sum is more than the parts kind of situation. Yeah, it's just really good. There's you got the blimp sequence in there too, which is really
no
fun.
ticket.
No ticket. It's really funny. Yeah, there's just a lot of really great. There's a lot of really great set pieces and moments, and just really moves really well. So yeah, it's just it's a good movie. Really, really good movie.
Amen.
Amen. Well, before we get out of here, well, I guess we should go through these one more time so for the listeners at home. So let's go through our rankings again. So at number 5 we have the Dial of Destiny. At number 4, the Temple of Doom. 3 we have the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. 2 we have Raiders of the Lost Ark, and 3 or I am all over the place. What's going on here? Number 1, The Last Crusade. I like that list. How do you feel about it?
I like it. It's a good list. I'm still a little surprised that we uh, put Crystal and Temple where we did, but I don't think it's wrong at the same time.
I gave you Last Crusade at 1, so I'm allowed to have my small
It's
victory. I'll take
it's
them
a
where I
fair
can,
trade.
It's definitely a fair trade. They're exactly the same. But before we get out of here, I do have to ask you, what is your favorite Indiana Jones MacGuffin?
Mm, see, the Last Crusade lover in me wants to say the Holy Grail, but mm, I'm I'm going to be a little unhinged here. I actually really like the Crystal Skull just
Oh,
as an
you did
object.
it.
And thinking about I have all the merchandise. That's my favorite one to just like look at because it feels so different than all of these because it's not really a mythological thing at that point. Where it's these are all baked in mythology of different cultures and religions and
Yeah.
different lore. Whereas the Crystal Skull is it's almost like a surprise to Indy. Like he doesn't really know what he's looking for.
Yeah.
And the Call of the Crystal motif for it just real good. It's the only motif that characters in this movie just want to stare into.
Yeah. I'm definitely with you where the skull is like the coolest like object like just to look at. Like I don't know, like it's just neat. It's a good idea. Like I don't know how they thought of that, but it's really really cool. Um yeah, I've shared my mentions of the stones kind of being lame in Temple of Doom. I think the Grail's pretty cool. Maybe that's my Catholic guilt coming out, but I think I think the Grail is pretty neat, and I agree with you where it's like, they wrap it into like his journey with his dad. It's good. It's the MacGuffin is more than just the MacGuffin. I like it a lot. I think that's probably my favorite.
I think they're all cool. Weirdly enough, though, Disney doesn't sell replicas of the Ark of the Covenant.
They
Go figure.
should. They should get a little Lego set of that. Why not? We have Lego set of everything else. Well, I think that about does it for this episode. Collin, thanks to you for espousing on your indie love. I think it was really good to, as before we get into award season, and to be able to talk about another summer blockbuster and the franchise that comes with it. What are we talking about next time? Is it a Gran Turismo time?
I hope not. I'm ready to talk about Killers of the Flower Moon, the next $1 billion movie of this year, but it's going to take a while.
Not soon enough, if you ask me. Well, we'll figure that out. Well, as for everyone out listening there, thank you so much for giving us a listen. As always, you can see the rest of our content on moviebabble.com. Look us up on social media. We're kind of everywhere. You can find us. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. And until next time, we'll see you.